We have officially had Teamfight Tactics in our hands for 2 whole months. That's right, we've been playing Teamfight Tactics for quite a while now. And honestly, I've been absolutely addicted to this game since it got released, and it's been a huge opportunity for me to delve into a strategy genre that is still just figuring out its own identity. Now, since the first auto chess came out inside the Dota 2 client, we've seen Underlords, we've seen Teamfight Tactics, and we've actually seen a lot of different games on mobile, specifically in China and Korea, that mirror this same game type. And it couldn't have come at a better time. We've seen a very long-standing interest in strategy card games and tactics games, with Hearthstone and Magic the Gathering still going very strong, and a lot of those players are making their way into this new auto-battler strategic tactical style game. It has some of the basic strategic elements that card games have, but you also have added elements of positioning, as well as combinations and synergies, and some very highly random elements that make the game interesting. On top of that, because it's 8 players playing in a round robin format, you're not playing the same player over and over, and so every round keeps itself fresh and very different as you go along through the game. Not only that, but it actually has a more pronounced early game, mid game, and late game than a lot of the card games do, because you're able to hard commit to what you're building up towards. And there's an income and economy element that we know works really well in real-time strategy games. So today I want to talk about some of the issues that are facing Teamfight Tactics as a game, and answer the question, where are auto battlers going in the future? To me, I think there's 5 main areas to focus on when you're thinking about what will Teamfight Tactics do in the coming years. Riot has already announced that they're going to keep Teamfight Tactics as a mode inside of League of Legends, and I think this makes a lot of sense for where it is now. Not only is it stable inside their own League of Legends client, but it also means that anyone who has interest in Teamfight Tactics is now getting funneled as a user into League of Legends. And so their main drain, their main product, League of Legends, is bringing interest in through the title of Teamfight Tactics. So for now, it makes sense for them to keep it. My personal guess is that it's going to actually move outside of the League of Legends client sooner than they say. I think it'll be probably 2 or 3 years before we see that happen. Some say over 4 years or more, but I doubt it's going to last that long. But there are some unique elements to Teamfight Tactics that the other auto battlers just don't have. But there's also some issues that I see that I think are going to be a big focus for them in the next year or so of hyper development. The first one I want to talk about is currently, Teamfight Tactics has a very heavy fundamental focus on attack speed over any other stat. This is because the amount of mana you can gain per hit is hard capped, which means that obviously if you can't gain more by dealing more damage, your only other option is to attack more often. This makes recurve bows and other attack speed items highly valuable for almost any unit in the game, whether you're an auto attack based character or you're a unit that uses abilities that are very impactful. We've seen them make some adjustments to this by adding in new synergies or looking at items like Shojins or Archangels, but regardless, it's still really hard to ignore the fact that items like Static Shiv, RFC, or Rage Blade make units very effective in multiple ways. Take, for example, putting 2 Rage Blades on a Kayle. Now, normally if you see a unit getting hyper attack speed like this, you think, okay, this unit's gonna be a hyper Kayle. They're looking to deal a lot of damage like a Draven or a Jinx, someone that's gonna auto attack a lot. But you're not using double Rage Blade on Kayle so you can deal a lot of damage. You're using it because the hard cap on mana per hit means that you wanna attack as much as possible in order to cast more abilities. And that makes that stat overvalued in my opinion. And I'm very curious to see if they're going to stick to this fundamental idea in Teamfight Tactics. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can go with this. You can actually make it less of a cap. You can raise the cap gain per mana, and that means units that hit harder will actually gain more mana. And it could potentially be interesting to see putting an Infinity Edge or a Bloodthirster on a unit to make them hit harder in order to gain more mana, or even a Sword of the Divine that makes them crit more often, which would give them more mana. And that would give you more options besides just raw attack speed in order to cast more often. And honestly, I think this is a little bit of an Achilles heel for the way the itemization and the stats in the game work. However, this does bring me to my second issue with the game, which is far and away more than any other auto battler on the market. Teamfight Tactics has a insane focus on items. The items themselves are more powerful individually than any unit or combination you can possibly get, and generally getting the right items on the right unit is the ideal. Anytime you see a competitive game, no matter what you do, there's always going to be an optimal combination of talents or skill sets or itemization that goes well to get the best possible outcome. And you're seeing this a lot in Teamfight Tactics. If you get the proper items, say you get double Warmogs and a GA or a Morellonomicon on someone like Swain, it's really, really, really hard to kill that Swain. And that's because the differential in power between Swain that's naked and Swain that has 3 items is so vast in this game that it becomes really difficult to balance the difference between the two. If you look at Underlords now, which has the single slot, or the items that you could make in auto chests that were a little bit more limited, it made it nice to get the right items. And of course it worked great for hypercarry specifically, but there weren't unbeatable combinations that you could get. Same thing goes for like a Kale that has double Rage Blade and a Shojin's. As soon as those Rage Blades stack up and Kale has max attack speed, especially if Kale is level 2, you're getting shields on your units constantly to the point where it becomes untenable going against that combination. Personally, for me, I'd like to see a little bit of the backing off on the items being the end all be all and seeing individual units or synergies buffed up a little bit in your final combination. A good example of this is anytime you get like a Draven in your build and he has no items, he's gonna do some damage, but the difference in damage he deals versus if he had 2 or 3 items on him is so great that oftentimes you'll just lose if you don't have the right combination. So I'm very curious to see what they're gonna do about this in the coming updates and over the next year, because I think regardless, they are putting so much focus on what items you get and how you combine them, that's kind of the main gameplay, especially at a very high level. It's not so much about the units you get as it is about the items you get, which I think makes the game a little bit more stale. The third issue that I see with Teamfight Tactics and a challenge they're gonna face in the next coming years is the idea of balance. Every single time we see a big meta shift, the meta shift actually solidifies pretty quickly, and then it becomes a game of getting the best possible units in order to win the game. We went through a patch where Ninja Assassin was the end all be all, and if you didn't get Ninja Assassin, you basically did not get first place. Then we went to a whole thing where Void Brawler was the big thing. Getting Cho'Gath and 4 Brawlers was all you needed in order to win the game. And now we're seeing a situation where it's either 6 Brawlers or you get Nobles. Nobles has been such a hard thing to shut down, and realistically, because those units are so much more powerful than others, it makes it difficult to play anything else, and it also means that whoever gets that build first is usually going to be in the top level of the players in the round and will end up in the maybe first, second, or third place, most likely first place. And honestly, the item focus makes this situation even worse because there's going to be items that work really well with the current build that works in the meta. And if you get those items plus that build, it becomes really difficult to shut down. Like for example, you got hypercarry items on a Jinx, and then you got double Rage Blade and a Shojin's on a Kale, and you get 6 Nobles. There's not really an easy way to counter that, and most of it just comes down to items. Now we're seeing them try to address this problem by adding in things like hextech, which shut down items, and I think there's been a lot of complaints around hextech itself, but realistically, it does need to be powerful enough to shut down items that are problematic. But I'm wondering if it's better to bring hextech down slightly and then make items a little less important and units a little bit more important. In order to make the balance in the game a little bit more healthy, I think they need to be a little bit more flexible with the stats and the items that make the big difference, right? Like in my earlier example, if damage dealt per attack gave you more mana to about an equivalent level as more attack speed did, that gives you a lot more options rather than just running double Rage Blade and Shojin's, because you could actually just go for a heavy attack speed build. Maybe putting Sword of the Divine, Infinity Edge, and Bloodthirster on a Kale gets about the same amount of mana as double Rage Blade Shojin's would, because she's hitting harder per shot, which would give her more mana. You see what I'm saying? There's an opportunity there to give more breadth to what works in the game in order to open up more possibilities. And then if you add on top of that more flexibility in the items and their impact on your overall team build, means that you could potentially start running some more unique options rather than just what's the current flavor of the month, because it just beats everything so unequivocally. And I think that should apply to synergies as well. One of the gripes that I have with the noble buff as it is right now is the noble buff actually doesn't leave itself open to a lot of counterplay. It has good physical armor, it has good magic resist, and it has good lifesteal, right? If one of those legs were missing, you'd have an opportunity to shut down the units, right? Anti-healing would shut down the life on hit. Getting more physical units like assassins or gunslingers would work well if it didn't have physical armor, or if it only had physical armor like it did when the game first came out, then running sorcerers against nobles would work awesome because they have that weakness. They're not covered on all bases. But I don't think it's that simple, because the nobles themselves, 3 of the nobles you're using are 1 cost and 1 of them is 2 cost. That means 4 out of your 6 units that you're using for your end game build are low cost early game units that don't hold as much of a candle against these higher 4 and 5 costs. So I think inherently design wise, they have to make the buff that nobles get strong enough to warrant you putting out 4 low cost units in your final end game build. I just wonder if there's other ways to attack that problem. And the number 4 question I have for Teamfight Tactics is, how many units is too many? The more units that get added to the game, the more of a problem we're going to start to see. Realistically, you probably felt this when 4 hextech units were added to the game. Before that patch, it was pretty easy to get the combinations that you wanted. Now with 4 more units in the game, you're gonna start seeing more of those hextech units and start to miss the units you're looking for. And this problem will continue to exacerbate up until a point where there's gonna be too many units in the game. If we're in the mid 50s right now for units, but then we start getting up into maybe the mid 80s or the mid 90s, if you're looking for Yordles, for example, it's gonna get a lot harder to find Yordles unless we start adding a lot more Yordles to the game. So on the PvE right now, we do see that Pantheon's gonna be coming as another dragon and another guardian, and this gives you a lot of flexibility in combining those units together. But as we start seeing new synergies, classes, or origins added to the game, and a lot more units added in, statistically it becomes less likely that you're gonna get the units you want, and it's gonna be harder to get those units to 2 and 3 star as you're getting stronger towards the end of the game. So that is an interesting challenge. Now what they could do is they could make it so maybe each patch they limit the units that are available. Maybe there's 80 units in the game somewhere in the future, but they limit it to every patch, maybe only 55 are available. We see this a lot in card games where they have specific drafts where they exclude types of cards in order to limit the pool from being too big. But I think there is going to be a question of how many units can you add to Teamfight Tactics before it comes too many. And I think the 5th challenge that faces Teamfight Tactics as it moves forward into the future is damage taken versus the game length. This is an interesting question because currently, even after the adjustments, you still take a lot of damage for every loss in Teamfight Tactics, and I don't think the loss streaks are worth the amount of HP you lose, because it puts you at risk of losing mid-game even if you have a bad round, because it's likely that someone's going to get a big burst in damage or strength, and all of a sudden you lost one last round that took the last little bit of HP away from you, and suddenly you lose the game. So I think naturally you're just going to say, well, why don't you just make it so you take less damage? But I don't know if that's the answer either, because the games right now last a good 30 to 40 minutes. So if you start taking less damage, all of a sudden 30 to 40 minutes becomes 40 to 60 minutes, and then you start having hour-long games. Remember, TFT is the only auto battler right now that has a carousel-like round, and that takes out a good chunk of time out of the match where you are just choosing units in the middle of the map, going through the carousel, and adding game time to the overall match. So I think inherently the designers were looking to keep the games short while also including the carousel in the match itself. But I think it does still feel pretty bad to take the amount of damage you do currently before losing the game. So there's gonna be some questions around how much damage can you take, how much feels good and how much feels like it's too much, and is there a way to balance that against the overall game length and make sure that the games don't start running too long? Because honestly, I don't think this game would be fun if it was 60 minutes or more, where it just becomes too difficult, especially especially with how hard set you get in your build once you finally get to mid and late game. Now, obviously, you have to be in the top 4 or top 3 in order to make it past 30 minutes, and so that's kind of a saving grace where if you get knocked out early, your game isn't that long and you can start a new one, but it is something to keep your eyes on. But I want to hear from you. What do you think is great about Teamfight Tactics and you think is going to be a staple part of the game? And what are some elements that you think could be improved or potentially create a system where the game becomes stale too quickly, or elements that might just start grating on you over time and make you want to play a different game? Let me know in the comment section down below. And of course, as always, subscribe, comment, and like. Check me out on my live stream. Check me out on Twitter, Instagram, the whole shebang, and I'll see you in the next one.